Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is Rebels Creed, Book 2 in the Lawful Times series, I guess, by Daniel B. Greene. So I did review Book 1. If you have not seen that review, please check out that video because inevitably there will be spoilers considering this is Book 2 in a series. So you have been warned. This time around, I got the ebook and the audiobook, so I know how to pronounce Chlid. Chlid. It's like you got to pronounce the H a little bit, at least according to the audiobook narrator. And pro tip, make your protagonist's name easy to pronounce. It kind of reminds me of what Patrick Rothfuss did with Kvoth. Kvoth, I don't know. He decided to make his protagonist's name difficult to pronounce. Not that I ever expect to see another book from Patrick Rothfuss. And secondly, I would like to thank all of you new subscribers out there. My Breach of Peace review has done pretty well, and thank you so much for the kind comments. I'm really glad you appreciated the deep dive from a writer's perspective. I wasn't sure if it would go over quite well, considering a lot of people who review books. It's shorter length, and they don't go so deeply into writing craft. So did Daniel Greene improve in Book 2, Rebels Creed? Did he take in all of the constructive criticism he received and really dove deep in writing craft and just tried to polish this thing, tried to make it better than the previous one? That is what we are here to discuss. So let us begin with the hook. What is Rebels Creed about? Well, the 7th Precinct is destroyed. Holden, the only survivor, the apprentice to Chlid, he is seeking answers to try to find out why they all died, why they were all murdered. And we do find out Chlid, hopefully I got that right, is alive. She is imprisoned. She's an experiment of the Empire. Her very being is transforming into something monstrous. And as more information comes to light, as Holden digs deeper, he comes across the path of rebels. And he joins forces with rebels doing what rebels do, taking down an empire to fight this oppressive government and religion. So what did I think? Well, let us begin with character. The most important topic, in my opinion, the thing that holds everything together. Without character, nothing else matters. First and foremost, there are a lot of characters in this book. I didn't take count, but I feel like there's probably at least twice as many, if not more than that. And I think that's a little bit unfortunate because even though this novel is longer, it's no longer a novella. I think it's close to 300 pages long. Because we added all of these extra characters, we don't get to dive deep into their heads. We don't get to learn their motivations, their desires, their traumas, which is one of my complaints in the first novel. Again, you don't really get very deep in any of their heads. You don't really learn much about them. And unfortunately, that is why this book for me was kind of a difficult read. Because when you don't care about anybody, the plot doesn't matter whatsoever. So a good third of the book is by our friend Chapman, the one who brought it all down in the beginning, in the first novel. This is the first part where I thought there was going to be some character development. It felt like it. It really felt like things were going that direction because we spend an entire third of the novel or thereabouts with Chapman. It is a flashback. It is told before the events of Breach of Peace. So we were following along with this character step by step, week by week to learn why he did what he did. And there is a glimmer of character development. Something is happening. One of the characters, one of the rebels that Chapman is working with flat out asks him, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And that is the moment when you think something's going to happen. And then he says, I was bored. Yeah, and that is sort of the end of Chapman's section of the book. Unfortunately, not really much depth there, not enough for us to hold on to, and I was really looking forward to hoping that something like that was going to happen, hoping that I was going to learn something about Chapman. And we do learn about him. We learn about his past and his culture and things like that, but do we care for him? Not really, unfortunately. Holden, the apprentice of Chlid, the guy who pretty much wants to have sex with everybody. Yes, that is exactly who this guy is. That's about the depth you can expect from this character. He's having sex with a woman at one point, and then he walks into a room where there's a man, and he immediately internally makes a comment about, oh, I want to have sex with him. Then we learn he has a lover who has flipped the grip. I'll get into that later. Another male. And again, I advocate for sexual diversity in fiction completely. However, here it was handled very awkwardly, felt very forced. It felt like he was putting in there just to put it in there. So that's Holden. Anyway, that's pretty much the extent of Holden's character development. A lot of sexual stuff. There's a bunch of other characters. As I said, there's this character named Flip who's a grip. They're these big, burly, kind of wizard-like warriors, I guess. They have these Star Wars force powers, kind of. And there's Josh, who is the writer who we met at the very end of Breach of Peace, who was writing the lies. And there's some other rebels who I won't get into too much. Oh, and there is another grip named And Daniel, I really hope this is a callback to Conan the Barbarian. If not, I am disappointed. But anyway, finally, Clyd, our protagonist from the first novel, we find her. She is transformed into some kind of creature. She seems to be confused. Her mind is twisted. There's something wrong with not only her body, but her mind. But she kind of flat out tells us that at the end. I didn't really get that from the prose itself, from the narrative. There are moments when she's going apeshit. Then there's moments where she's talking just coherently with her friends when she meets up with them. And so those two items seem like they would be in conflict, but the struggle just is never really illustrated for us. So it's this weird thing where at the end she tells us she's having trouble. We just never see that she's having trouble. So unfortunately, pretty weak character work. Some glimmers of character development that just kind of fall flat. They're unrealized, and it's really unfortunate because the plot, it's kind of ordinary, it's kind of familiar. So let us talk about it. Let's talk about the plot of Rebels Creed. I think the best way to talk about this novel is the strange structure in which it is constructed. So as I said, Chapman, we have a solid third of the novel in his point of view. A prologue at the very beginning, because prologues, of course, are at the very beginning. We learn that Clyd is alive. She's mutating. And then we have sporadic POV chapters of her, as well as other characters, seemingly out of convenience, right? Seemingly out of convenience. And what I mean by that is that Greene is putting characters in certain places, switching POVs because he wants to tell that part of the story, because that is how he constructed the plot, rather than it feeling like an emergent progression of character, going from place to place, event to event, to where it feels like a natural progression. Now, a lot of people seem like they had a problem with the time jump, meaning the first third of the novel takes place before Breach of Peace. I don't think that's a problem. I think the problem is the way he wrote it. We are literally reading from Chapman's POV for the entirety of that. We're not interjected really with other POVs, because if you want to write something like this, I think what you need to do is you need to have this flashback and the current timeline run in parallel. And by in parallel, I mean you switch back and forth from POV between timelines in a meaningful way, to where all of these things come, or two of these things come to a head at the very end to culminate in your climax. So you can see all of these events having an interplay, creating meaningful conflict that really feels like it's driving the plot forward. You don't want to just have a chunk of the novel be the past and then, okay, I'm done with that, I'm going to hop to the present now and just keep moving along, when all of that doesn't really matter. It almost seemed like Greene wanted to just tell us what happened. He wanted us to empathize with Chapman, see his motivation, and unfortunately it wasn't there. And this really reminded me of the game The Last of Us 2. If you have not played that game, I will explain the biggest problem I had with that. So we already love Joel and Ellie, the two protagonists of the first game, and a new character named Abby kills Joel before we even know who she is. And then we're forced to play her, forced to empathize, quote unquote, empathize with her by the game developers in a very frustrating way, because we don't care. So my point is that presumably we're supposed to hate Chapman in the beginning. Now, I don't think we really did, because we never really cared for Clyd and her husband. But that's beside the point. It felt like Greene was trying to have us empathize with a character that brought everything down, that killed these characters that we should have cared about. Unfortunately, we didn't. And I think that's the failing. I would have honestly done something like I was talking about, have these two parallel timelines interconnected, where an event here really feels like it's affecting something here, to where you get to the end and you're like, oh man, I see how it all connects now, but that's just not what happened. There's one scene I should bring up that I found quite interesting. It was with this grip named Flip, who is one of Holden's lovers. Anyway, one of these anointed comes in, who are, you know, the big baddies in this world, and they're playing a game of chess. And the anointed is questioning Flip. Where are his friends? Where are these rebels? And interspersed with those questions are literal chess moves. Pawn to a4. I'm probably getting this wrong. I don't play chess. But anyway, I thought it was kind of a cool moment of tension. I thought it was an interesting way to sort of break up the action in the scene and the dialogue. Now, I saw some people making fun of it. They thought it was stupid because no one's going to know what those moves are unless you're, you know, have the chessboard memorized. But it didn't really bother me so much. I thought it was kind of a cool little element to break up the flow of action, to create tension. Unfortunately, that tension didn't really culminate to anything, so bit of a missed opportunity there, but I'd say the scene itself, reading it, was kind of interesting. So let us move on to the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. It's more or less the same as Breach of Peace, so it's short, simple sentences that convey action clearly. but there's no subtext. There's no elements that allow us to get into the character's head, to feel what they feel, to understand what they're trying to understand. There's a lot of telling, not enough showing. We're constantly told how people feel rather than experiencing it through action or emotion. And it also felt rushed from a pacing standpoint. So there were events that happened really quickly, like something would just turn very, very quickly. And I don't mean in a good way. I mean kind of an awkward way where I had to kind of jump back a line or two to see, oh, did I miss something? At times, it felt like this novel just really needed time to breathe, right? I felt like it didn't ebb and flow. Pacing needs to ebb and flow. It needs to speed up. It needs to slow down, depending on the context of the scene, depending on the mental state of the POV, the person who is experiencing this. It needs to reflect tone. It needs to reflect character. And honestly, a lot of times it felt like, so when I'm writing a rough draft or an outline, sometimes I'll do shorthand. There were times in the novel where it felt like that. It felt like, oh, I'm just going to jot this down because I want this to happen. But when I actually get to the prose itself, when I start drafting, I'm going to flesh it out. I'm going to make it feel like it's cohesive. It has a nice flow to it. So really strange stuff there. There was also a lot of POV shifts. And I'm not talking about just from character to character. I'm talking about within the POV itself. So there were observations, there were comments that some of these characters made that they would not see because we're seeing from their eyes. Does that make sense? So for instance, if I have blood on my cheek, I may not know I have blood on my cheek. Someone needs to see that, or I need to feel it. But there were literal times in this where it seemed as if the camera, being the eyes of the character, just did a complete 180 and was looking at the scene from a distance. And that's something that a lot of writers, or beginning writers, I should say, fail to realize, is that when you're in the POV of the character, you stay in the POV of the character. You need to experience the world as they experience it. Don't pull back for convenience. Don't pull back because you're trying to communicate something they may not experience. That's the fun thing about it, right? Is that you're literally in the heads of these people in this world. Don't try to treat it like a movie. But speaking of a movie, if you want to switch POV like this, if you want to sort of have distance and have closeness, think of it like a film. Think of it like at the beginning of a film, when a camera starts high, lowers into a scene, into the bedroom of the character or wherever this character is, and then we are in that tight POV. So it goes from far to close. You can do that a couple times at the end of a film, at the end of a novel, maybe waypoints, stopping points in between that, but don't do it all the time. Here it just felt like mistakes. So don't do it randomly for convenience. It just confuses the reader. An internal thought. He had a lot of internal thought in the first one, and that is indicated again by the italics in the prose. And it is unfortunately very prevalent here, telegraphing emotions, motivations, things that just feel out of place, things that could be communicated with action, with dialogue, with how another character reacts to another character. And then on that note, there were a couple of instances where thoughts were italicized followed by he thought, which you don't need. So it was kind of a strange, confusing mix of those. I would say those are few and far between, but they are there. And swearing, there seemed to be like there was less swearing in this. In the first novel, it felt forced, cheesy, like someone was having a great time writing the word fucking shit. This one does have swearing in it, but it doesn't feel quite as forced, quite as prevalent. So good job on that. All right, with all of that said, I'm going to have to give Rebels Creed a 4.5 out of 10. Yes, the same score that I gave Breach of Peace, because while some things felt like they were going in a positive direction, like they were improving to some regard, there are a lot of other problems that were created, a lot of other negatives that happened in this novel, unfortunately, that still kind of brings it at a below average score. Again, frail characterization, strange plot structure, a lot of telling, not a lot of showing, and just a lot of, honestly, editorial mistakes. I'm not talking strictly about typos and stuff, just like the POV stuff I mentioned. Pacing issues as well. And even though this novel was longer, I felt like it just needed more time to breathe. There were a lot more characters that we needed to get in the minds of, hopefully. But alas, we have another novel that needs a lot of work and needs a lot of editorial help. And I really hope that with this second round, the second book out, that Daniel really listens to the constructive criticism. He slows down, because I think this book came out pretty quickly after the first one. There's no need to rush a story, no need to rush a book. Take your time, do it right. And I know you have a rabid fan base out there who are probably buy anything you do, but do it for us. Do it for the people who respect good storytelling and honor the craft. So anyway, if you would like to see me create and not critique, you can check out my books, my novels in the description below, or my Worth 1,000 Words series, where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork on the spot without an outline. And give me a like if you like the video. Subscribe for story-related content. Thanks again for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.